Two nuns were guarding a strange man in the church. His name is Harker, a lawyer from London. A month ago, he had just escaped from the land of vampires, Transylvania. He had become like this. Harker claimed to have encountered a vampire. On the day of the incident, Harker's firm received a commission. He was sent to Transylvania to handle financial matters for a count. The coachman dropped Harker off halfway, and he refused to approach the count's castle. A maid even handed him a cross, and told Harker to carry it with him at all times. Soon after, the count personally sent someone to pick him up. Harker unfolded a letter from his fiancée Mina in the carriage. He had a smile on his face. Soon, the carriage arrived at the castle.
Actually, driver, could you help me with my cases?
The lawyer's gaze is not good. This coachman clearly had issues. Harker knocked on the heavy door. A swarm of bats flew out from inside. Harker entered the ancient castle. The warm yellow candlelight flickered, casting a glow on the plates on the dining table. He was about to pour himself a glass of wine. Harker caught a glimpse of Count Dracula upstairs. He apologized for his rudeness. Fortunately, Dracula didn't mind. He even invited Harker to dine freely. As Harker ate, he introduced the documents. As long as Dracula signed the documents, he would obtain Carfax Abbey. During the conversation, Dracula expressed interest in England. He said he was tired of the locals. Dracula wanted a change of environment and taste, so he wanted Harker to stay and teach him English. Harker quickly explained that he was returning to England tomorrow. Dracula said, "I have already discussed with your supervisor. You must stay and accompany me for a month." Dracula led Harker upstairs. The spiral staircase resembled a snail shell. Harker was captivated by the architectural style. Dracula explained, "This house was designed by the architect Petrus Varga to commemorate his deceased wife, and the sunlight he could never touch again." Harker arrived in the guest room to unpack his luggage. He accidentally cut his hand. The metallic sweet smell nearly drove Dracula insane. Fortunately, he quickly retracted his fangs. Dracula wasn't exposed by Harker. He could read a lot of information from human blood. Dracula realized that Harker had a fiancée, which was why he was eager to return to England. Dracula turned to leave the guest room, and Harker heard a scratching sound against the glass. He walked over to pull back the curtains. Harker saw the scratches on the glass. He leaned out and saw someone flash by, but with such tall, smooth walls, who could possibly be climbing outside? Harker went to bed with his doubts. He dreamt that Mina had turned into Dracula. The dream was quite horrifying. When he woke up, it was already the next morning. Harker discovered that the scratches on the window formed a message that read, "Save us." Could it be that the person scratching the window was trapped in the castle? Because Dracula said we would meet tonight. So Harker had the entire day free. He decided to search upstairs to see if anyone needed help. But the castle was like a maze. Harker nearly got lost. In the following days, he searched for people during the day. While Dracula continued to feed on Harker's blood, he kept refining his English accent, and he was becoming younger and younger. Dracula's once white hair returned to black, but Harker didn't realize that this situation was completely abnormal. That night, he questioned Dracula if there were any other people in the castle. Dracula replied that there would be servants during the day. Harker was not fooled, because he had not seen any servants. As Dracula grew younger, Harker became weaker and weaker. He thought he was simply ill. Harker still didn't give up on the idea of rescuing others. He continued to search around every day. Finally, he made a significant discovery. Harker found many sealed wooden boxes. He pried it open and saw many photographs. Where had these people gone? Would he become the next victim? Harker was very puzzled. Just then, a shriveled corpse crawled out of the box. It grabbed Harker. Harker struggled to break free and ran away. A white-haired corpse chased after him, muttering Amarama over and over. Harker ran into a cave to shake off the pursuer. He discovered a stone coffin in the cave, with Dracula's name engraved on it. Harker held up the lamp and looked at the crack. Dracula suddenly opened his eyes from inside. Harker had nowhere to escape now. Before he fainted, he only remembered Dracula's crimson eyes. The two nuns suddenly pointed out, "Amarama is Romanian, which means kill me." Harker didn't understand the meaning of this phrase. The people in those wooden boxes were already dead. The nuns explained. Their bodies had indeed decayed, but their consciousness would never die. They referred to such infected individuals as living dead. The living dead are a lower form and not yet called vampires. Harker fainted and didn't wake up until evening. Dracula instructed Harker to write a letter to his fiancée Mina, but Harker couldn't remember who Mina was. It took him some time to recall that he had a fiancée. Harker's body and consciousness had become extremely weak. Dracula ordered him to write 3 letters. The first one stated he was almost done with the work here. The second said the work was completed, and that he would depart for home the next day. The third letter stated that he had left the castle, and arrived in Bistritz. Harker didn't understand why he had to write these letters in advance. Dracula explained that the postman's whereabouts were unpredictable, and he needed to send the letters early, so that Mina would know he was coming home.
If something were to happen to me, and those letters had already been sent...
Then Mina wouldn't think to come looking for you here.
Harker detected the threat in Dracula's tone. Dracula had already pronounced his death sentence. These 3 letters were meant to clear his suspicions, to prove that Harker had left the castle. Now he had only 2 choices in front of him, to wait for death or to kill Dracula. Of course, attempting to counterattack wasn't an easy task. He was trapped due to his weakness, so Dracula wasn't on guard. Harker needed to find that wall-climbing ally, to deal with Dracula together. He gave up the search, although Dracula had said that there were no maps of the castle, but the architect Peter was an artist. Artists always hope to be understood. Since this castle was built to commemorate the architect's lost love, the portrait of his deceased wife on the wall might be the breakthrough. Harker removed the frame and found the blueprints, and he discovered that Peter had created a shortcut through the maze. Dracula probably didn't know this. Harker immediately crawled into the hidden passage. This time, he successfully climbed upstairs. Harker found the woman he had sought help from that night. She was locked in a specially designed wooden box. The box was connected to a spherical feeding device. Harker saw a dead baby lying inside. It was then he realized the woman had already been assimilated. Harker took out the cross to intimidate her. He was quickly tackled by the woman. Harker had lost too much blood. He vaguely saw the baby in the feeding box, who had also turned into a living dead and was crawling up. The woman was killed by Dracula, who pierced her heart for daring to covet her master's food. Dracula didn't see Harker as a threat, and thus revealed his weakness. As long as a stake pierced the vampire's heart, it could end their immortality. Dracula carried Harker to the top of the castle, and pushed him into the morning sunlight, asking Harker to describe the sun goddess, as he had not looked at sunlight for centuries, and today would also be Harker's last time seeing the sun. Dracula had already prepared a coffin for him. Harker pleaded with the Count to spare him. Dracula bluntly said, "I have trapped you to learn the manners of the English, and then to move there, to destroy everything and everyone you love. But if you swear not to try to stop me, then I can let you go." Harker had always been an honest man. He would not help a villain. Harker refused Dracula's request. In the next moment, his neck was snapped. Harker lay on the ground convulsing. Then he slowly got back up. Harker was different from ordinary living dead. He retained his self-awareness. Harker didn't want to live like this. He ended his own life. Dracula was about to stop him, but unexpectedly, a cross revealed itself on Harker, instantly burning his skin. Harker fell toward the abyss. Unexpectedly, he fell into the river. After being swept into the sea, Harker was rescued by fishermen. He ultimately ended up imprisoned in the monastery. Sister Agatha realized after hearing this, that although the low-level female vampire wasn't afraid of the cross, but Dracula feared the symbol of God. Sister Agatha was very excited about this. Doesn't this prove that God really exists?
God saved you for a reason, don't you think?
I'm not saved. I'm nothing.
Sister Agatha said, "When you didn't want to live anymore, did you ever think of Mina?" After she finished speaking, she walked over to another nun. It turned out Mina had been sitting right in front of Harker, but he couldn't recognize her. Mina had never given up on her fiancé. Even though Harker had become like this, she still loved his soul. In the next moment, a bat flew in and scratched Mina's face. Dracula had arrived. Sister Agatha hurried outside to check. A vicious dog stood outside the door. Sister Agatha knew that he was Dracula.
The beds are a little noisy, would you mind?
Now the sun had set. Dracula no longer needed to hide in the dog's skin. He tore through the skin and emerged from the dog's belly. Dracula revealed his true form before the nuns. Sister Agatha knew that Dracula had come for Harker. She also knew that vampires couldn't enter without an invitation from their master. He couldn't force his way into the monastery. Dracula wasn't in a hurry. With so many nuns here, he only needed to use immortality as a condition. Dracula could always tempt someone to extend an invitation. Sister Agatha countered, "I am not sure which nun might be weak-minded." She knew well that vampires were the most uncontrollable beasts. After saying this, Sister Agatha cut her palm. and splattered her blood onto the ground.
Go on, help yourself. There's a dog comes past here most days. We often give it scraps.
Sister Agatha threw the dagger to Dracula, and disdainfully offered him a drop of her blood. But unexpectedly, Dracula could glean information about the master through the blood.
Helsing! Van Helsing!
This nun is Van Helsing, the most famous vampire hunter in Dracula-related works. The adaptation not only reimagines him as a female, but also adds the name Agatha, which is a tribute to the Queen of Mystery novels, Agatha Christie. Because in this version, Van Helsing is just a weak nun, so the writers endowed her with the wisdom of the Queen of Deduction to contend with Count Dracula. This is quite an interesting adaptation. At this moment, the scent of blood stimulated Harker's bloodlust. He picked up the stake and handed it to Mina. Harker hoped his beloved would kill him with her own hands. Of course, Mina wouldn't be able to do it. Harker was then tempted by the blood. He dabbed a bit of blood from Mina's wound, and greedily brought it to his mouth to drink. The more he drank, the thirstier he became. Mina was stunned by his actions. She didn't know how to respond. Fortunately, Harker, with his last shred of rationality, snatched the stake back and took action himself. By the time Agatha arrived, he was already lying dead on the ground. Dracula heard the conversation between the nun and Mina from downstairs. Once the two left, he climbed upstairs to check on Harker. It turned out Sister Agatha had overlooked one thing. Suicide was ineffective against the living dead. Only when someone else drove a stake through their heart could it work. Dracula softly tempted Harker. "Do you want me to help you end your life? All you have to do is invite me in." The mentally broken Harker was persuaded. He let Dracula into the monastery. Dracula decapitated a nun while everyone was praying. He vowed to bathe the monastery in blood tonight. The nuns took out their crosses for defense, but Dracula commanded the wolves to kill them. Only Agatha and Mina were hiding in a room encircled by communion bread. They barely managed to save their lives. Suddenly, Harker ran over for help. Mina quickly invited him inside to hide, to prevent him from being caught by the Count. But in the next moment, Harker tore off his face, revealing the smile that belonged to Dracula. After Dracula ended the massacre at the monastery, he didn't kill Agatha, but took her back to the castle to tell her the story of his adventures in England. Dracula boarded the Demeter and prepared to head to England. Let us first introduce the guests traveling with him. First, there was the sailor Pieter who had replaced the deceased, the servant Ian who sneaked onto the ship. Next was Dr. Sharma, who studied the living dead, and his deaf-mute daughter, the newlywed Lord and Lady Ruzaphine, along with their black servant Baron, as well as a bearded captain and his bald first mate, and an elderly woman with white hair. It would take 4 weeks to reach England. Dracula chose to board the ship as a count, to avoid being cooped up in a coffin for 4 weeks. When no one was around, Dracula exhaled a cloud of mist into the air, to shield himself from the soon-to-appear sun. In the evening, the guests gathered in the dining room for dinner. Although Baron was a servant, he was very particular, and he didn't give Lord Ruzaphine a good face. From their conversation, it could be inferred that Ruzaphine and Baron were close friends, and that marrying Miss Dora was merely a reluctant act. Although Dracula didn't consume human food, but he enjoyed the company of humans. So Dracula also approached the elderly woman in the dining room. From their dialogue, it was revealed that the woman was the Duchess Valeria of Osborne, and she was born into Bavarian royalty. A gentleman in England wanted to write a biography for the Duchess, which is why she traveled to London at great effort. The Duchess switched to her native language halfway through. Dracula didn't want to reveal his rusty German. He remembered there was a German sailor on the ship, so Dracula made an excuse to go out for some fresh air. He seized the opportunity to drink the German sailor's blood. When Dracula returned, he had already mastered fluent German. Dracula continued to pretend to be knowledgeable as he chatted with the noblewoman. Under Dracula's guidance, the Duchess recalled her 18th birthday, and suddenly realized that the man before her was the one who had invited her to dance all those years ago. He had not aged a bit over all these years. Dracula took the Duchess back to his room to satisfy his hunger. The next day, thick fog enveloped the area, drastically reducing visibility. Ian couldn't find the German sailor. Now, only room 9 had not been searched, but the captain had said that a patient was staying there, and that no outsiders were allowed to disturb him. Just then, another sailor reported that the Duchess was also missing. Dracula was quite particular, and he retained the old-fashioned biases of the aristocracy. That is why Dracula first consumed the noble bloodline of the Duchess. Next, he set his sights on the Ruzaphine couple, a young and handsome noble pair. Dracula was very pleased, and he sensed that the man had a complicated relationship with Baron. Unfortunately, Lord Ruzafin's wife Dora was completely unaware. The long voyage had left her unable to sleep. Dora went up to the deck for some fresh air. The helmsman Dean secretly had feelings for this young lady, but he knew their social status was too different for him to hope, so Dean only warned his beloved to be careful of the slippery deck. A more dangerous Dracula was waiting. Dora, young and carefree, was unguarded around strangers. Moreover, Dracula was very charming, and he quickly gained Dora's trust. Dracula leaned in and warned her that he was a vampire. Then he used a magic to make Dora see the future happy life of her and her husband through the reflection of the wine barrel. Dracula did this because the taste of those who die in joy is sweeter. A drop of blood fell on the doctor's daughter's face. The girl looked closely and discovered that the blood was seeping in from the deck. She quietly left the cabin to peek. The girl happened to catch Dracula feeding on Dora. He was like a fox that had fallen into a henhouse. He had killed 3 people in just 2 nights. Everyone was now filled with panic. The deaf-mute girl Minnie didn't expose Dracula. She was afraid he would harm herself and her father. Then Dracula suddenly stood up and said, "We should find the murderer. It would be best to search room 9 first." The captain refused to let outsiders disturb the sick guest. He went in alone to search. As the door opened, a wave of stench rushed out. The crew could only hear faint breathing sounds. Before long, the captain emerged and said, "Everything inside is normal. There's nothing unusual." The sailors trusted the captain very much, and naturally didn't doubt his words. The others also checked the boxes in the cargo hold, which were all filled with potting soil. There was no trace of the missing passengers anywhere. Now there was only one possibility left. They had indeed been murdered and thrown into the sea, and the murderer was hiding among the passengers and crew. Everyone must stay alert and be cautious of everyone. They would report it to the authorities once the ship arrived in London. Just then, Dean suddenly fell from the sails and broke his leg upon impact. The scent of blood almost revealed Dracula. Sharma wasn't a surgeon and couldn't help. The captain ordered the crew to lift Dean onto a table, and then he forcefully set Dean's injured leg. Dracula was driven by the smell of blood to hide in the dining room. Unexpectedly, Rusafin and the others were also there. He struggled to maintain his facade and greet everyone, but his thirst for blood grew stronger. Dracula could almost see the sweet liquid through the veins. At this moment, Sharma was chatting with Rusafin. He was curious why Rusafin, being so wealthy, had chosen the Demeter. Baron chimed in. A partner sponsored Mr. Rusafin, which is why he had the funds and status to pursue Dora. And that partner, Mr. Baller, booked the ship for them. Upon hearing this, Sharma quickly said, "Baller is also my sponsor. This is definitely not a mere coincidence." Sharma was about to ask Dracula if he knew Baller, but the other party had already left the dining room. Sister Agatha couldn't help but interject. Dracula is a variant of the Latin word Dracul, which means dragon, and in Romanian, the word for dragon is Baller. This means that Baller is Dracula. The passengers on the ship were actually personally selected by him. Dracula wanted to enter England to prey on civilized people, so he needed to learn how to coexist with them first. Thus, this ship is a rehearsal prepared by Dracula for his upcoming life in England. But he lost control and killed Dean again. The captain was about to order everyone to assemble, but Ian came over to report that most of the crew had escaped in the lifeboats. The first mate no longer indulged the captain, and asked who exactly was hiding in room 9.
How did I get here? We were at the convent. You let Mina go?
Yes, but I didn't let you go, did I?
Locked in room 9 was none other than Agatha. Such an insightful and intelligent vintage. Dracula certainly wanted to treat her as a portable blood bag to sip from slowly. The scene shifted back to the main storyline. Everyone burst into room 9 and discovered the Duchess's necklace on the table, along with other victims' belongings. Dracula pulled back the curtain to reveal the weakened Agatha. He identified her as the murderer. They tied Agatha to the deck, and the captain, who had sheltered her, was dragged out for questioning. The captain helplessly explained, "I received a commission from the client, Mr. Baller, which is why I helped care for his sick wife." Dr. Sharma couldn't help but question. This woman looks so weak. How could she possibly have killed 4 people in just a few days? Dracula reminded the doctor that appearances can be deceptive. Agatha suddenly shouted that I am a vampire, which is why she could kill 4 people and sink their bodies into the sea.
You know what a vampire is, don't you? A foul, stinking, slouching monstrosity.
Agatha truly lived up to her name, as she now taunted Dracula. Agatha shouted that she would eat them one by one, or let someone brave come forward and kick away the barrel beneath her feet, to see if she would die. The crowd hesitated, not daring to step forward. An angry Dracula stepped on the barrel. He was about to threaten Agatha with a few words, but, unexpectedly, she bit her lip and spat blood in his face. Dracula lost control and revealed his fangs. In a fit of rage, he kicked over the barrel and fled. The others hurried to rescue Agatha.
I am Sister Agatha van Helsing of the St. Mary's Convent, Budapest. Captain Sokolov,
Yes.
you are relieved to command.
Agatha disregarded her physical condition and began to think of ways to deal with Dracula. Agatha asked the captain if there were any suspicious cargo boxes, because vampires need to sleep in coffins or boxes, and they must contain soil from their homeland. The captain explained that they had 50 boxes of potting soil, but he didn't know which box contained soil from Dracula's homeland. They all threw them into the sea, leaving only one box behind. This plan was indeed sound, but Agatha didn't realize that Ruzaphine had already been seduced by Dracula and had joined the enemy's ranks. Ruzaphine even invited Dracula into Sharma's room. The latter took out a cross for protection. Unexpectedly, Ruzaphine produced a gun and threatened with his daughter's life. Ruzaphine ordered Sharma to put away the cross. Minnie didn't want to put her father in a difficult position, so she committed suicide. Angry, Sharma lunged at Ruzaphine, but he was shot dead by him. Dracula had seen enough of this scene and stepped forward to kill Ruzaphine. Dracula had originally intended to use this guy to win over the doctor, but he didn't expect Sharma to resist to the death, and Ruzaphine had no reason to live any longer. Ian heard the shouting and came in to check. He stumbled upon Dracula in the act of feeding. The scene shifted as Ian ran back to the deck, hiding with the remaining survivors within a circle made by Bibles. The captain was unsure if this method would be effective. Agatha explained that she had tested this method at the monastery. The captain couldn't help but retort, if this method can protect against vampires, how did you end up getting captured by Dracula?
Dracula gained entry by disguising himself in the skin of another.
Agatha said this, and everyone thought of a question. Since Ian stumbled upon the feeding scene, how could he safely escape to the deck? And he had entered before the circle was completed. Is Ian really the same Ian as before, or has he already been possessed by Dracula? Ian stepped out of the circle to prove himself, but the next second, Dracula appeared. Everyone hurriedly pulled Ian back. Dracula sat to the side, waiting. The long night dragged on. Not everyone had an indomitable faith like Agatha. He patiently awaited the first person to step out of the circle. Baron, who didn't believe in the vampire tale, was the first to waver. He pulled out his gun, wanting to avenge Ruzaphine. Agatha quickly advised him that he could shoot, but he didn't need to step out of the circle.
Stay inside the circle. Do as you're told. Do as they tell you, as you always do, because that's what you're good at, because you're a servant.
Baron fell for Dracula's provocation and stepped out of the circle. He fired several shots at Dracula's heart, but Dracula seemed completely unfazed and lunged at him. He drained Baron of his blood. Ian tried to rush over to stop him, but was knocked to the first floor. He smashed open a wine barrel on the deck. The captain and first mate also lunged forward to knock Dracula away. Several people held the vampire down. Agatha seized the opportunity to throw a lamp over. The flames instantly ignited the alcohol. Dracula screamed in agony from the fire. He could only jump into the sea. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Agatha knew the crisis wasn't yet over. She had been infected by the vampire, and absolutely couldn't go ashore. So Agatha instructed the captain to take everyone away. She would make a bomb using saltpeter and sulfur to sink the Demeter. Agatha saw the lifeboats leaving through the window. She felt a sense of relief mixed with desolation. Unexpectedly, the captain appeared. It should be his duty to go down with the ship. The captain was willing to accompany Agatha. Agatha suddenly discovered a box of soil hidden under the floorboards, which meant that Dracula had been hiding on the ship all along. By the time Agatha realized this, the captain had already been knocked down. Dracula, now well-fed, remained elegant as ever. He invited Agatha to come to the deck to chat. Meanwhile, the captain suddenly opened his eyes. He instructed Agatha to find a way to stall Dracula. The captain crawled towards the saltpeter to blow up the cabin. The Demeter gradually sank. Dracula hid inside a wooden box and sank to the seabed. After an unknown amount of time, he finally pried open the box. Dracula crawled up onto the shores of England. Suddenly, searchlights illuminated above him. Helicopters and cars surrounded Dracula. Agatha stood in front of him with a group of people. It turned out that it was now 123 years later. Dracula had been sleeping at the bottom of the sea for over 100 years, and had fallen behind the times. The woman before him was named Zoe. She was a descendant of Agatha, which is why they looked similar and smelled alike as well. Dracula took the female photographer's gun and held Zoe hostage. Then he transformed into a bat and escaped from the coast. Dracula began to explore modern life. He fed on a man named Bob. After obtaining Bob's memories, he found Bob's home. When Bob's wife Catherine opened her eyes, she saw a stranger in her home. Dracula was about to kill Catherine, but when he saw the cross around her neck, Dracula had to lie and claim he was Bob's friend. Catherine believed him, and went to the living room to look for her husband. She discovered that Bob had been stuffed into the refrigerator by Dracula. Catherine grabbed a kitchen knife for protection. Bob tried to crawl out of the refrigerator. Dracula snatched the knife away from Catherine. Then he directly killed Bob. Dracula wiped the blood off the blade. He couldn't understand why modern households had no servants.
I'm assuming you have staff. You're clearly very wealthy.
Wealthy?
Dracula was unaware of the current living standards. He thought the food supplies were abundant. There was even a car outside. This family must be wealthy. Catherine noticed his impressive demeanor in his suit. He didn't seem like an uneducated person. Just then, the phone rang suddenly. Catherine answered and suddenly ran out of the room. Dracula was afraid of the sun and dared not follow. He heard a noise upstairs and went to investigate. Dracula found a coffin on the floor, and inside was a mobile phone. He picked it up to answer. Zoe reminded him on the other end of the line. "The sun is out. You need to hurry and get into the box."
You may not have noticed, but there's a roof over my head.
I've noticed.
Dracula was unwilling to submit. He devised a plan to lure Zoe into the house. She was suffering from cancer. Her blood was lethal to vampires. After drinking the toxic blood, Dracula collapsed. He was taken back to the experimental base by Zoe. During transport, he caught a glimpse of a portrait of Harker on the wall. This research base was established by a foundation named after Harker, which specialized in studying vampires. In fact, Dracula would have continued to sleep indefinitely, but when the foundation's people salvaged the wreck of the Demeter, they accidentally opened the sealed wooden box. They had thought Dracula was long dead, not realizing that just a drop of blood could restore his vitality. Fortunately, Dracula had already been captured. He was confined in a specially designed glass room. Zoe could freely control the range of light, and control Dracula's movements. She prepared to draw a vial of vampire blood for research. Zoe found that she couldn't pierce his skin. Dracula used his nail to cut open his wrist, and gave her a vial of his blood. Dracula couldn't understand what the connection was between this foundation and Harker. Zoe explained that this place was founded by Mina. Years ago, Dracula had let this fragile woman go. Unbeknownst to him, she inherited a vast fortune after her father's death, and joined forces with the Sisters of the Convent to establish this foundation in Harker's name. Zoe, as the primary person in charge, managed this family business. The main goal of the Harker Foundation was medical research, and Dracula was the best specimen. As soon as she finished speaking, a lawyer named Frank appeared. He was the lawyer hired by Dracula. Never underestimate a vampire's abilities. Dracula had learned how to go online through Bob's blood, and had contacted the lawyer via the internet. The firm where Frank worked had been handling Dracula's affairs since 1896. In the 21st century, everything is about human rights. The Foundation's actions amounted to illegal imprisonment. When Dracula crawled ashore, although he had harmed humanity, but the Foundation sought to protect itself, and sent people to erase all traces. Thus they had no leverage against Dracula. However, the Harker Foundation, as a medical research institution, had its own mercenaries, and they might not even pass the police scrutiny better than Dracula. After all, vampires are just a legend. Frank demanded that Zoe release his employer after sunset. The Foundation wanted to avoid drawing police attention, so she had to agree to release Dracula. Fortunately, Zoe still had a vial of vampire blood. After some distress, she opened the vial and drank it all. Perhaps only in this way could she unlock the mysteries of vampire blood? On the other side, Dracula was determined to seek the most delicious food. He took the phone belonging to the intern Jack. A girl named Lucy quickly called to briefly introduce the relationship between Jack and Lucy. Jack was a backup. Lucy was the goddess of the sea. Jack was deeply in love with Lucy, but she regarded him as just a backup, and she was about to marry a wealthy man from Texas. Dracula had set his sights on the young Lucy, and this girl was indeed bold. After she learned of Dracula's vampire identity, Lucy willingly offered to have her blood drained. Their feeding relationship lasted for 3 months. That night, they agreed to meet in the cemetery. Dracula took Lucy to feel the ground and said, "There are 9 living dead buried here. They have been scratching at the coffin lid. Although the dead do find rest after death, but there are still a few unfortunate souls who transform and decay." At this moment, a little spirit popped out of a coffin. He wanted to greet Lucy. This was undoubtedly a horrifying sight, but Lucy appeared very excited. In Dracula's long life, he had never seen someone like her. Lucy was the perfect food that Dracula sought. She had no fear whatsoever, neither afraid of vampires nor of death. Lucy had only one request, that every time Dracula drank her blood, he would give her a beautiful dream. On the other side, Lucy's friend woke up from the hotel, and found that Lucy was not in her room. He quickly opened his friend's phone to track her location. When the friend arrived at the scene, only Lucy lay alone in the cemetery. There was a pool of blood on her neck. Jack, knowing something had happened to the goddess, hurried over to check on her. He was studying vampires at the Foundation. Jack recognized the wound on Lucy's neck, so he had to go to the hospital to seek help from Zoe.
Because if it is Dracula, what keeps him coming back for more?
In the dead of night, the little living dead actually followed Lucy into the hospital. Fortunately, Dracula arrived just in time. He pierced its heart with a wooden stake. At this moment, Lucy's body had exceeded what she could endure, so Dracula prepared to transform Lucy. The next day, a nurse came to check on the patients. She found Lucy with wide-open eyes, already dead. Her family quickly arranged for her cremation. No one heard Lucy's anguished cries. Her consciousness and body burned in the fierce flames. Late at night, the crematorium staff saw the door ajar, and felt a bit strange about it.
Did you put me in the fire?
On the other side, in a daze, Zoe suddenly saw Agatha from over 100 years ago. It turned out that Dracula had drunk her blood back then, and now Zoe had consumed Dracula's blood, so the blood connected them. A part of Agatha entered Zoe's brain. They had become one. Zoe contacted Jack to go meet Dracula. On the table were 2 wine glasses. Clearly, Dracula was waiting for someone. Zoe reminded him, "If you are waiting for Lucy, I must remind you, she has already been cremated." Dracula was taken aback by this news.
But no, you don't understand. She would have been conscious the whole time. Her flesh melting, every cell carbonized, every particle of her being incinerated.
As soon as she finished speaking, the doorbell rang. It must be Lucy coming over. Dracula reminded Jack, "Appearance is just a superficial existence. Your goddess is as she always was." Even though Jack was mentally prepared, but he was still frightened, his breathing quickening. Lucy could only see through her reflection in the mirror that she was still beautiful. She didn't understand why Jack looked so panicked.
Come on, Jack. Kiss me like you used to.
Kiss me.
Zoe couldn't bear to watch any longer. She handed Lucy a phone, and through the camera, Lucy finally saw the truth. Dracula hurried over to comfort Lucy.
You're my finest bride yet. In 500 years, you were the only one who willingly opened up her veins.
Although Dracula didn't mind her appearance, Lucy couldn't get past this hurdle herself. Jack approached, holding the wooden stake. He leaned in to kiss Lucy. She felt the stake in his hand. She was willing to die at Jack's hands. In Lucy's final moments, Jack saw her beautiful face once more. The next moment, the stake pierced her heart, and Lucy died. Dracula stomped out the remaining flames. He complained that Jack had ruined his most promising subject. He also said that no one loved death like Lucy did. Zoe understood in this moment. She told Jack to leave first. Zoe had something to say to Dracula alone. After saying this, she gave Jack a look. The next moment, she dashed to the window and pulled down the curtains. Dracula instinctively fell to the ground to avoid it, but Zoe told him to stop and said, "The sun is 93 million miles away, and cannot harm you at all. Whether it's fear of sunlight, or not being able to enter human homes without an invitation, these are not the curses that vampires bear, but rather habits that slowly turn into blind faith, and eventually become legends. Over time, even you came to believe it." Zoe retorted, "Why would Count Dracula fear these legends? You come from a family of warlords. Your ancestors, brothers, and descendants all fell like heroes on the battlefield. Only Dracula has lived on. He has lurked in the shadows, stealing the lives of others. He even became infatuated with a human girl, just because she deeply loves. What Dracula fears the most, death."
Now we know why this works. Because it speaks of the courage you long to possess. The courage it takes to die.
Zoe was already dying. She was about to do what Dracula dared not do, die. The game between them had finally come to an end. Dracula had completely lost. Unless he could fearlessly accept death, he would forever live in shame and shadow. In the end, Dracula fed on Zoe's toxic blood, and died in the arms of the nun. This season's story ends here. The film was adapted from Bram Stoker's classic novel of the same name, and created by the screenwriter of Sherlock. The plot is full of reasoning spirit, unraveling the mystery of Dracula's immortality. Why vampires can't enter without an invitation. Whether their fear of crosses proves the existence of God. Finally revealing the secret of this magical creature's immortality is actually because of an excessive fear of death, though it still revolves around the vampire theme, but the writers have indeed brought something new to the table. As for whether this innovation is satisfying, that can only be answered by the audience. If you like my channel, please click subscribe.